Thank you, Mr. Farage. Harry Farley from BBC News. You've spoken about this being the last chance for the BBC. The outgoing CEO of News at the BBC, Deborah Turness, said the corporation is not institutionally biased. What do you think of that? And what specifically do you think needs to change at the corporation to reform? And on small business, you used to talk about scrapping business rates for high street firms, but last week you said widespread tax cuts were not realistic. Can you clarify whether you would still scrap business rates for high street shops?
The BBC has been institutionally biased for decades. I well remember the Wilson report 2 decades ago, saying the BBC were not covering areas like Europe and immigration with any sense of impartiality. And you could, add on to that net zero, climate change, all their interpretation of the horrors that have happened in Gaza. And now, of course, the United States president. I spoke to the president on Friday. He just said to me, "Is this how you treat your best ally?" It's quite a powerful comment, isn't it? It's quite a powerful comment. So there's been too much going for too long. You might have noticed, Harry, that last year 500,000 people stopped paying the licence fee. The year before, 500,000 people stopped paying the licence fee. If the BBC doesn't now get a grip, get somebody in from the outside, somebody who has got a history and a culture of changing organisations, of turning them around, then I think what you would see within the next couple of years are many, many millions just refusing, just not wanting to have the licence fee. I spoke to Nadine Dorries at some length this morning. She, of course, the former Culture Secretary, now a member of Reform, and she was the one trying very hard to bring some reforms in. And I rather agree with her. We need to very much slim down BBC. When it comes to entertainment, when it comes to sport, and many other areas like that, well, they should compete against everybody else for a subscription model. That's the modern world that we live in. So the licence fee, as currently is, cannot survive. It is wholly unsustainable. Which, by the way, doesn't mean I don't want a BBC. I think part of our global brand, I think the BBC is important. I think BBC World Service is actually very, very important. And I think the BBC should get back to doing news, but just to doing straight news. If it can manage that, it has something of a future. If it can't manage that, frankly, it has no future at all. Moving on. Yeah, I did say last Monday, this country has got to start living within its means. And I think actually people have woken up to that. We simply cannot go on amassing debt at the speed that we are. What I would say, in terms of what we're going to put together as a manifesto for small business, will be up as much to the 300 businesses in this room and the tens of thousands that I believe are going to join us. But don't underestimate. Yes, of course, there are costs to business, but don't underestimate what in the old-fashioned days we used to call supply-side reform. And supply-side reform means getting government, regulators, bureaucrats off the back of men and women running small businesses. And that's what we will intend to do. Now, on to Olivia Utley from a slightly perkier GB News, I think, this morning. Although I do have to declare an interest, obviously.
Morning. Can we have a few more details? You talked a lot about what the problems facing small business are, but what exactly are your solutions? What changes would you make to corporation tax and business tax? And on the BBC, who would you ideally like to see as the new Director General?
Well, I did notice that Donald Trump's press secretary, Catherine Leavitt, suggested British viewers watch GB News, not the BBC, which was quite interesting last night. Look, I don't know who comes in from outside, but it's got to be somebody from the outside. As I said, I think it's somebody from the private sector. It's somebody that's gone into a failing organisation and has turned around not just the profitability of the organisation, but turned around the culture of the organisation. And My worry, Olivia, with the BBC is it employs its people from such a narrow segment of society that I don't think they think they're biased at all. It's just the worldview of people the BBC employ who happen to live in North London, rather than the view more broadly of what's out there in the country. So someone dynamic, someone from the private sector, but somebody with a history of turning around cultures. Is it possible? I just don't know. I just don't know. As I mentioned the Wilson report earlier on. That was a big wake-up call to the BBC 20 years ago, that it had to change culture, and nothing actually did. Harry Horton, ITV.
Thank you very much, Harry Horton, ITV News. One of the biggest bits of red tape that small businesses face at the moment, and one of their biggest complaints, is the paperwork they have to fill out when they're dealing with the EU and sending goods to the EU. You've said you'd rip up the government's SPS deal if you got into government yourself. Wouldn't that immediately create much more paperwork for thousands of small businesses across the UK? And then just on the BBC, the broadcasting landscape in this country at the moment is dominated by big American giants like Amazon, Netflix, Disney, Google. I could go on and on. Are you worried about what it means for British culture if the BBC in future is much smaller, weaker, and less consumed than it is today?
Well, why doesn't the BBC then reflect what British culture actually is, rather than the absolutely mad... I mean, that's our complaint. They've gone so mad on DEI and everything else, they're not reflecting the country we're living in. If they did reflect the country we live in, we wouldn't have the current crisis and the current problems that we've got. We had 50 years of red tape from Brussels, 50 years of endless red tape. Some of it would have been regulations, rules we sensibly might have put in place ourselves. But it's actually a double problem. It isn't just the EU rulebook, big problem though that is. It is the massive over-interpretation of that rulebook by regulators, by quangos, by bureaucrats in this country. And you speak to people out there, working in all sorts of businesses, and the regulators aren't there to work with business. Their culture is to work against business. And I'm sure if you stick around after this room, you would pick up stories from individuals here about just how difficult it is for them even to survive. So I'll come back to culture. I do think that the EU, its rules and regs, but I also think the way that Tony Blair fundamentally changed the way the country's run by taking enormous power away from ministers and elected politicians and handing it over to quangos and regulators has made the life of small businesses much, much harder. So there is a lot to do in this country, with our own people as well. Mari Aurora, Sky News.
Thank you. First of all, you've criticised Labour's workers' rights policies and committed to potentially undoing some of them. You said you might want to cut minimum wage for younger people. What is your message to workers today? Are you the anti-worker party? And if I may, on the BBC, what do you make of President Trump weighing into the conversation about the BBC and the British media landscape? Do you welcome that, or does that concern you?
Well, if I was the President of the United States of America, if I was the person making sure that the United Kingdom had security guarantees that meant that it could be defended, whereas on its own it would be helpless, and I'd been stitched up on the eve of a national election. I mean, people talk about election interference. What the BBC did was election interference. If you put yourself in Donald Trump's shoes, I think you'll understand why, when I had a chat with him on Friday, he made his feelings on the subject known to me in no uncertain terms and not in a quotable form. Even your question is the question, even your question is the problem. There are only 8,000 big businesses in the whole of the United Kingdom. Only 8,000. 99% of companies have fewer than 50 employees, and most of them are 1- or 2-person operations. And the whole national debate about the economy and about jobs and about work and about legislation focuses solely on those big businesses, because they're the people that have the voice. They're the people that appear on the morning TV and radio shows. We are pro-worker. We believe what we do will create many, many more jobs. Many, many more jobs. And I would say this, jobs, yes, and people will have to work hard, but jobs that will come with a quality of life. The other thing that is never understood, whether it was in Brussels before or in Westminster now, there is this assumption that employers are the bad guys, employees are the good guys. Let me tell you something. Most people that run family businesses treat their staff as well as they treat their own families. I know that. I promise you, they really, really do. But the problem is, these people haven't got a voice. There's no one to speak for them, which is why the bigger we can build small business for reform, the bigger voice all these people will have. And that is our stated aim. Today is that first brick that we're laying on the ground. We intend to build something very, very substantial. Noah Hoffman from The Sun.
Thank you, Mr. Farage. I was wondering if you could outline what role small businesses could potentially play in tackling Britain's bloated welfare bill and getting youngsters out of the bedroom and into the workplace. And secondly, if I may, what your plans are to ensure that high streets are beautiful again and aren't just covered in illegal migrant vape shops. Thank you.
You know, what I said 2 weeks ago was that if you reduce to £5,000 the level at which employers start to pay NIC, and you substantially increase minimum wage for young people, you will finish up with fewer young people in work. And sure enough, year one, there are 50,000 fewer young people in work. I would say that immediately in this budget, what Reeves has to recognise is that bringing the NI rate for employers down to 5,000 has been bad for young people getting into the workplace. And frankly, I want as many young people as possible to get jobs, to get into the workplace, and to get into the habit of actually working. When it comes to the high street, well, the high street's had problems for all sorts of reasons. You know, we know online, etc., etc. Turkish barber shops are doing very, very well indeed. Very, very well indeed. Whilst many of these people here have been debanked because they have one payment that seems to be unusual, and they're caught under anti-money laundering regs. I mean, you literally couldn't make this situation up. All I would say about the high street is one of the things in the high street that does still survive is the bookmaker's shop, which actually, for a lot of lonely people, is a place they can go in, meet people. There are 22 million people, 22 million people a week have a bet of some kind in this country. Yes, there are a few problem gamblers, but there are problem drinkers, there are problem drug takers, there are problem everythings. And I worry that if she puts up gaming duty significantly in this budget, not only will it close hundreds, maybe thousands of high street bookmakers, but I genuinely wonder whether Clacton Pier and the other 400 seaside villages and towns that have innocent amusements where kids put in tuppence, you know, those maddening machines. You always think you're about to win big, don't you? I still think I'm going to win big. I never do. And my worry is it will close all those down too. So, you know, you've got to get this right. And if she does put a big... And it will be a tax on turnover, not on profit. So the impact on the high streets, the impact on our seasides could be very, very serious. I very much hope she listens, and I know The Sun have been taking this incredibly, and quite rightly, seriously. Martin Beckford, Daily Mail.
Thank you. You mentioned big business owning the political arena and lobbyists taking people to Wimbledon. Do you currently want your MPs not to take freebies? And would a future reform government, would ministers be banned from accepting corporate hospitality? Thank you.
Well, that depends what corporate hospitality is. And you've got to define it properly, haven't you? Is it having a cup of tea? Clearly not. Is corporate hospitality going to Wimbledon? Perhaps it is. Look, the most important thing about this is that it is above board and it's not hidden, so that everyone can see. But I can promise you, I can absolutely promise you that it is the voice of big business that Brussels listen to. It's the voice of big business that Westminster's listening to. And I've had these debates and arguments over the years with ministers. They say, but Nigel, it's what business wants. So no. It's what two big businesses want. And actually they want an environment that makes it as difficult as possible for small and medium-sized businesses to survive, to flourish, and to come and challenge their role in the marketplace. They want to squeeze everybody out. I'm not anti-big business. We need big business. We need car manufacturers. We want big investment in this country. I'm not anti-big business. I'm anti-government that doesn't understand how important, in terms of choice and development of markets, small business is. That's what this is about. We're not anti anybody, let alone workers. We're pro-workers. We believe what we do in the next government, we get half of this right, could create millions of jobs, millions of good jobs. And we really, really believe that. Martin, thank you. Tony Diver, Telegraph.
Thank you. Mr Farage, can you be a bit more explicit about your policy on small businesses? At the last election, you pledged to scrap business rates entirely for SMEs. You also wanted to introduce a corporation tax-free allowance. Given that you've rowed back on some of your other tax pledges last week, do those pledges still stand? And can I also ask you, when you spoke to Donald Trump about the BBC, did he tell you what he wants to do about it?
Not sure before the watershed I can answer that one. Look, what's done is done. What's done? Trump. This isn't about Trump. Trump's just the final straw of what we've seen over the course of the last weeks, months, and indeed decades. Look, I've made it very, very clear, Tony. Today is the start. Today is the first brick in what is going to be a big, strong, powerful building that will have a voice for business. I understand what you say. It links in very much to the question from Hassan about business rates. We will build and forge a full policy on this between now and the next election. What I will say, though, specifically, is that the VAT threshold is far too low, and it's one heck of a burden. Stefan Bossier from The Times.
Thank you, Nigel. Stefan Bossier from The Times. A lot of the words you've said today will be seen as an attack on big business. You said it's an age of global corporatism and that they own and sell Westminster. Are you not concerned about the sort of thing that could do to business investment under a potential reform government, particularly amongst big multinational companies?
No, I'm very happy for big business to invest in Britain. I'm very happy when Nissan years ago opened car factories. I was very happy when I worked in London and 300 foreign banks headquartered in London. Very happy with that. I'm not anti-big business. I'm just anti-big business having such a say over government policy that small business doesn't get a look in. And believe me, small business has not had a look in for years and years and years. It has become the most neglected sector of the British economy, and yet, as Kevin said, it's half the economy. So let's give it a voice. Right, we're getting there. We're over halfway through. James, in case you're getting bored, don't worry, we're going to get there. James Hill, Spectator.
At the beginning of your speech, you criticised Treasury thinking. What would a reform government mean for the Treasury? Would you break it up, first of all? And secondly, you talked about living within your means. Will you commit that your next election manifesto is going to be fully costed by an organisation like the IFS, for instance?
It'll be costed, whether we trust the IFS to do it. I'm looking at Richard Tice, who's laughing quite loudly down there. We might find somebody else to do it. Yeah, we might find somebody else to do it. Yeah, look, of course we'll have a costed budget, all right? Of course we'll have a costed full budget, but we made it very, very clear last week that we actually have to be honest with the British people. There need to be substantial spending cuts. We cannot go on as we are. And, you know, people like you, James, and others who call me populist, I'm not being populist at all. We're not promising all things to all people. We're being straight with people. And I think, actually, there is a growing understanding in the country that we are in real, serious economic decline. We are in big trouble. George Lithgow from PA. George?
What else did you speak about on Friday with President Trump?
It's a very, very good question. It's a very good... Shame you've wasted it, really, isn't it? But it's a very, very good question. No, we talked a little bit about the British political scene, as you might understand, and we talked particularly... Now, I will say this. Other things I won't say, but I will say this. We talked about energy. About energy, without which, without reliable energy at cheap pricing, we are seeing literally an industrial massacre in this country. It comes month on month on month, and we give ourselves almost no chance of getting into the 21st century technologies, which, by the way, will be big businesses, yeah, data banks, etc. I'm not against all this. And we are going to need a lot more energy than we've ever had. And to currently have the highest industrial energy prices in the world, Trump just thinks is a most self-destructive act. And I agree with him 100%. Our energy policy is mad. Okay, Lucy White from Bloomberg.
Thank you. Businesses have for years been complaining about the lack of growth finance in the UK and their ability, entrepreneurs' ability to exit their business when the time comes and start something new. What do you plan to do around that area to increase growth finance in the UK and exit opportunities? And both yourself and Richard Tice have spoken in recent days about private equity and the shame that it is that so many of our businesses are being bought by private equity. Do you plan to introduce restrictions on that if reform is to get into government?
Well, the first thing I would say is slightly more, I mean, I understand your question, but exit tax. Now, there is now talk of an exit tax. You want to sell your business, you want to move, there'd be an exit tax. And there's rumours that could come into the budget. That would mean that people just wouldn't invest here. They'd start investing elsewhere. And that, I think, would be a major, major problem. When it comes to finance, well, look, there is already a secondary lending market that is building and developing out there. No one quite knows the scope or the scale of it, partly because banks quite massively de-risked after what happened in 2008. So, I mean, I'm worried there could be some scare stories down, down that rabbit hole at some point in time. Private equity, well, of course it exists, but what we would like to see is a London Stock Exchange that once again has IPOs. And I can't promise to wave a magic wand on that, but I think your question is part of a much bigger question about the Financial Conduct Authority and the way in which it operates in what is still Britain's biggest industry. It has lots of individual players, but it's Britain's biggest industry. So look, I would say this to you, no exit tax, otherwise you're going to kill investment in this country. And let's have a serious think in terms of financial services, in terms of funding of businesses and operations of a stock exchange. We need a really big, hard thing. I can't give you an immediate answer. All I would say is this, that we have to compete. We have to compete against other stock exchanges, yet we keep stamp duty when our competitors don't. There are many things we can do to at least begin this process. but we can't stop private equity being good at what they do. Mauricio Alencar from City AM.
Thank you. Just on the VAT threshold, some right-wing economists have called for it to be lowered to promote growth. How high should the VAT threshold be?
Significantly higher than it currently is. And if you ask, there are so many businesses, there are so many one- and two-man bands who find themselves literally on that cusp. They're literally on that cusp. And that's why the argument for increasing the threshold makes sense. You know, you're operating a one- or two-man band, you can sort of understand that you might be at or near where the threshold is. Remove that worry, and I would say it would need to be sort of, well, I'm not going to predict now whether it's up 75%, 100%, but it's something in that region. And at the moment, it's a damn nuisance to a very large number of people and a huge worry to a very large number of people. And it's one of those things, you know, Kevin talked about it earlier, it's one of those things, it's the difference between having one member of staff and two members of staff. You know, and if that conversation is had amongst millions of businesses, you begin to see what the potential for this sector of the economy really is. Removing some of the headaches makes an awful lot of sense to me. Mari Novick from the FT.
Hello. It's not entirely clear to me. So you did speak to Trump on Friday about the BBC. Can you be a bit clearer about exactly what you said and what was said and what he replied?
Look, you know, I'm not going to say any more than I've said. He was very, very unhappy. Is that the way you treat an ally? Well, it's not the way that I treat an ally. I mean, the guy was stitched up in the most unbelievable way on the eve of a national, general, and presidential election in America, and he and large numbers of Americans are utterly furious about it. And, you know, at a time when there is quite a big debate in America about just how much support they should give to this side of the pond, whether it's to Ukraine or whether it's to us, and that debate is happening, it's a very, very damaging thing. It's good that it's been dealt with for now, but just getting rid of two members of staff does not eradicate the cultural problems that lie deep within the BBC and have for many, many decades. Aggie Chambray from LBC.
Thank you very much, Aggie Chambray, LBC. If your small business board recommended closer ties with the European Union to make the regulatory burden on business lesser, would you do that? And also, if I may, you said you want the BBC to just do straight news. So under a reform government, would that mean that the BBC wouldn't host things like The Traitors?
Well, it wouldn't need to, would it? It wouldn't need to, because it would be, if it was going for programs like that, or Strictly, it would compete on the market, and it would compete for us to pay, as we have to pay to watch all sorts of services and streaming services. It's a fundamental change. It's a fundamental change, and I think its time has come. Sorry, your first question? Oh, sorry, EU regulations. Yes, sorry, similar to the previous one. Look, you know, it is extremely unlikely that small business, if it thinks it can have a voice in making laws in our country, would decide to have absolutely no voice at all in laws that were made in Brussels. And that's the point. You know, masses and masses and masses of EU law put into British law over decades. And you ask yourself a question, why is the European Union, why has it been for the last 20 years, in terms of economics, in terms of tech development, falling behind every other major region of the world? And one of the big reasons is it is stuck with technocratic and bureaucratic thinking. But look, we'll listen to whatever they have to say, but I would consider it, I'd be very, very surprised if our small business forum thought more unaccountable laws, which they could have no say over whatsoever, would be a good idea. Okay, Tim Ross, Politico.
Thanks very much. Just following on from that point, big business in the city in particular would welcome a closer relationship with Brussels. Would you be willing to consider that potentially, since you're keen to see big businesses invest, as you said earlier? And secondly, you're aiming to become Prime Minister and to represent the UK around the world. Apart from Donald Trump, who you clearly talk to quite often, who else do you have a good relationship with, and who else among the world's leaders and politicians do you most admire?
Thank you. Look, as far as the city's concerned, what we've done is we left the single market, which should have made life easier with the rest of the world, if a little trickier with Europe, but we haven't changed anything else. We made one change by leaving the single market, and we've done nothing to get rid of the most ludicrous legislation. And I'll tell you this, I mean, I'll back to IPOs, actually, and the Financial Times question of a few moments ago. London is now too expensive to do business. Why? One, the EU rulebook, but two, and even worse, the way that our own regulators, in this case the FCA, impose the rules. Well, it seems actually the FCA are now more worried about DEI employment policies in financial services companies than they are as to whether they're any blooming good or not. In terms of other world leaders, there are one or two other world leaders that I know and I've met, and I suspect after the next electoral cycle in Europe, there'll be even more that I know. But, you know, of course I know Mr. Orban, and of course I know Giorgia Meloni, and of course I know these people. And, you know, I have over the last few months developed some relationships in other parts of the world, which I'm not going to disclose at this moment in time. Will Hazel from the iPaper.
Thank you very much. It's quite a big day in the preparation of the budget today because the OBR has submitted its first forecast to the Treasury. Your head of policy, Zia Youssef, has said some quite strong stuff about the OBR. He's described them as fake experts, a bunch of morons, and said they have no credibility. Would you scrap the OBR? And just on the BBC, if I may, Nigel, do you think all of the BBC's revenue should come from that subscription model which you outlined, or would that core kind of news function, could that be funded by a diminished licence fee, do you think?
Well, I'm very surprised that Zia Youssef would use language like that. I would have thought he'd been much harder and got a lot further. I'm not sure the OBR served any useful purpose over the course of the last few years. I think we elect governments to make decisions, not to rely on everybody else as an excuse. But look, we will look at that, debate that. So when it comes to the World Service, the funding of the World Service comes out of the Foreign Office budget, which is right and proper. You know, is there an argument? Most of the BBC services should be subscription. Is there an argument there should be a small subvention for news? You know, I just think we're moving towards a world where we pay for everything. And if BBC News was good, would people pay a reasonable amount for it, just as they're paying for other channels or other news services? I think they probably would. But look, I'm going to work with Nadine Dorries on this. You know, she was the person really trying to drive change. She was the person that said that the last renewal was the last ever renewal with the licence fee as it's currently structured. So we're fortunate to have somebody in the, not here today, but somebody in the party, you know, who spent a lot of time, effort, thinking about this, thinking about Channel 4 News, getting rid of that, as a privatisation and many other things. So we'll fine-tune this, but I, you know, on the big picture, I agree with Nadine years ago that the licence fee is not sustainable in its current form. Eleni Courier from The Guardian. Sorry. I just thought a bit of lesser. Right, is that better? Fine, thank you. Eleni Courier from The Guardian.
Thank you. Picking up on what you said about lobbying by big business, will you set an example by stopping big businesses from sponsoring Reform's conference from next year? And secondly, can you tell us what your position is on electoral reform, and do you still back proportional representation?
No is the answer to your question. No. I mean, I'm not against big business. I just want these guys to have a chance. On electoral reform, I've always favoured AV+, you know, which would mean significant minority voices will get a vote in the House of Commons. But the really big electoral reform that I favour, and it would need to be a high bar, but I do think the British people have a right, if they feel the political class are out of touch with them substantially on a major issue. I do believe the British people should have the chance. It's got to be verified, yes, but a chance through petition to call a national referendum on a subject of their choosing. And I do believe in that very, very strongly. Okay. The last question, Archie Earl from Unheard.
Thank you, Mr. Farage. Would you be looking to renegotiate any international trade deals to help small and big businesses?
Yes, the answer to that, of course we would. And, you know, there's a very big world out there, many, many opportunities that we haven't as yet explored. I mean, let's be fair, you know, small businesses do export considerable quantities, you know, specialist engineering, etc., also invisibles, such as services. Whether the small business community, again, has as much of a voice in trade negotiations as they deserve, I think is open to doubt. But you know what? We're open to everything. And that's the point about what we're doing and what we've said ever since last Monday on economics, on business, on entrepreneurship. We're a party prepared to adopt fresh thinking. We think the settled status quo on all of these things has been an absolutely desperate failure. And if you want evidence of that, just look at the people that are emigrating. Not just the non-doms, not just the super rich, but lots and lots of 30-somethings who are heading off to other parts of the world where they feel they'll actually be given half a chance as entrepreneurs, not penalised too heavily on tax or regulation. And we want to make sure a lot of those people come back and live in our country. Thank you.